My name is Amelia Hayes. I am 37 years old, and I used to be a senior director at Sterling and Rowe Consulting, a top financial consulting firm in New York. I gave 12 years of my life to that place. No vacations, no complaints, not a single word of protest. And yet, as I lay in a hospital bed after emergency surgery at Luke's Hospital, still hooked up to an IV line, a message appeared on my phone screen. Cold, shameless, unreliable, you're fired, all access has been revoked, don't come back. I read it over and over, thinking maybe the painkillers were playing tricks on me, but no. The message was real. Richard Monroe, my boss, ended my career with a single text while I was still breathing through an oxygen mask. And the cruel twist was that the patient lying in the bed next to mine was Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Horizon Capital, the fiercest competitor Sterling and Rowe had battled for the past decade. Have you ever been betrayed at your weakest moment when you thought you deserved understanding only to have someone trample your trust instead? If you've ever faced that, leave a comment below, hit like, and subscribe to follow the rest of this story. Because what happened next, no one could have predicted. And I promise you'll want to know exactly how I made the betrayer pay. I still remember the feeling of my phone slipping from my hand, falling off the edge of the bed and landing softly on the floor. Just a small sound, but it felt like a blunt blade hacking through the trust I had built with my own hands for more than a decade. For 12 years, I lived like a shadow inside Sterling and Rowe. While others vacationed in Miami, I was fighting through meetings on the 48th floor, where the air conditioning was freezing and revenue charts never stopped rising. When my best friend walked down the aisle in her wedding gown, I was in Denver negotiating with a client about to pull out of a $12 million deal. On my mother's birthday, I sent her an email greeting because I was stranded at O'Hare Airport with a stack of documents that had to be fixed before morning. Last Thanksgiving, I ate cold turkey alone in a hotel room because Richard called, demanding I close quickly on a last-minute deal. I don't blame people for not remembering those sacrifices. But I once believed Richard would. In private meetings, he'd put a hand on my shoulder, his voice steady. When Sterling and Rowe expands, the vice president of strategic clients will be yours. No one deserves it more than Amelia Hayes. I didn't need an award, no flowers, no wine, just recognition from the man at the top. And I believed him. Until the day Richard announced the new appointee. Ethan Monroe, his nephew, barely 2 years into the firm, the same one who had leaked internal data and sunk a $9 million deal. He stood in an Armani suit, stumbling through a parroted speech, while I sat in the back of the conference room, not a single glance cast my way. I smiled. The kind of smile you force by biting down on your teeth. I call it the smile of the one left behind but still expected to clap. So when that termination text flashed across my screen, I wasn't shocked about being fired. What froze me was the way Richard chose to end it. No call, no reason, no shred of decency. Just 4 sentences, sent while I was still hooked to an IV, stitches raw across my abdomen, my heart trembling from medication. Unreliable, you're fired. All access has been revoked. Don't come back. I sat in stunned silence until a voice rose from the bed beside mine. Old employer? I turned. A man with salt and pepper hair, eyes sharp enough to read through my thoughts. He wasn't in a hospital gown, but a crisp white shirt, left arm tethered to an IV, right hand holding a worn brown leather notebook. I nodded, nothing left to hide. They just fired me. By text. He raised an eyebrow. An odd ending. But sometimes a gift in disguise. I frowned. A gift? He smiled faintly, the smile of someone who had walked through deeper cuts than I could imagine. Sometimes the thing that wounds us most opens a new path. I'm Jonathan Pierce. I froze. Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Horizon Capital, the man who overturned Sterling and Rowe in last year's Meridia deal. The man Forbes called the most strategic predator in investment consulting. And now he was in the same hospital room as me on a random March morning, watching my career crash to rock bottom through a single text message. I said nothing, but his gaze stayed on me, focused, unsettling. I don't usually comfort strangers, Jonathan continued, but here's what I know. If they truly thought you were unreliable, they wouldn't have waited until you were in a hospital bed to act. I didn't answer, but his words weighed on my chest. Richard had always told me, this market does not forgive weakness. Maybe in his eyes, illness was an excuse. Maybe I had disrupted his plans simply by not dying at the right time. I tilted my head toward the stark white ceiling, bitterness clawing at me. I once believed that loyalty and dedication would be enough to keep me safe. But the truth was different. Richard hadn't just fired me. He had chosen the moment when I was most defenseless to cut me down. My mother once told me, the strongest person is the one who holds their dignity when pushed to their lowest. I had forgotten that too long. But maybe today was the day to remember. I stayed silent, still as a corpse under a white sheet. But the look in the man beside me stirred something. Not because he was CEO of Horizon, but because his eyes carried no pity. Only assessment, calm, sharp, and yes, dangerous. Jonathan Pierce needed no introduction. In New York's financial world, everyone knew him, the man who convinced 3 corporations to abandon Sterling in just 6 months. Some called him a cold-blooded raider. Others admired him as a strategist who never misplayed a move. I never thought I'd speak privately with him. Yet here we were, 2 shadows cast in the same room, both tethered to IV lines, both facing wounds of very different kinds. Sterling has lost its mind, he muttered after finishing the text on my phone. Richard Monroe is the kind of man who never learns from failure, and he just handed me a gift I never dreamed of. I turned, my voice raw from medication and bruised pride. You see me being fired as an opportunity? Jonathan kept his eyes on the ceiling, as if talking to someone above us. I see a senior executive, someone who held 3 of Sterling and Rowe's most critical accounts, being kicked out without warning. That's not just cruel, it's a catastrophic strategic mistake. And to me, every mistake is an opportunity. He paused, then turned his gaze on me. Do you know why I'm here in this hospital? I shook my head. A minor heart procedure, nothing major. But lying here, I realized something. Health can't be reset, but teams can be rebuilt. And I'm looking for someone who understands clients, not just revenue numbers, but relationships forged through trust. He leaned back. I stayed quiet, though my thoughts churned. You, Amelia, are the only person from Sterling I've ever heard clients mention with genuine respect. You didn't just hold contracts, you held trust. And that isn't bought with a year-end bonus. I stared at him, unsure if the ache in my chest was from the stitches or from words that reached deeper than I expected, touching the dignity I'd hidden while years of work ground it down. And now, he continued, they've discarded you like faulty equipment, so I think if they won't keep you, maybe I will. I laughed bitterly. You're hiring someone just tossed out of her old company while she's still in a hospital bed? Jonathan shrugged, as if it were the most ordinary thing. I'm not hiring, I'm observing, and when I see value, I hold on to it. I stayed silent for a long time. This wasn't a kind man. I wasn't naive enough to think Jonathan Pierce was rescuing an abandoned soul. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the precision in every word. He did nothing unless it benefited him. But that didn't bother me. I'd lived long enough among false smiles colleagues who called me sister, right hand, only to cut my name from projects behind closed doors. Now, here was someone looking at me like a mispriced asset. And at that moment, I realized it wasn't that I lacked value. I had simply sold myself too cheaply for too long. I don't have anything, I whispered. No access, no data, no files, just memory, and a list of people who once trusted me. Jonathan smiled, not with pity, with recognition. Then you have enough, more than enough. You have something Richard Monroe will never have, your client's loyalty. I looked at him for a long time. No one had ever told me that. No one had ever valued trust as a skill. They called it soft, a pleasant trait as if it were optional, not essential. But Jonathan saw it differently. He viewed client trust as capital, and in his eyes, I was the one holding it. Something deep inside me began to stir, not revenge, but the glimpse of a door I had never considered. What about Richard? I asked. He won't stand still if I change direction. Jonathan tilted his head, unshaken. He fired you without cause. Under New York law, that makes his non-compete clause nearly unenforceable. And if he dares file suit, let my lawyers handle it. His voice was light but final. A declaration of war. I lay still, staring at the tiny hospital window. The sky outside was pale blue, hard to tell if it was morning or afternoon. But inside me, everything was suddenly clear. 3 days later, as a nurse, removed my IV line and prepped me for discharge, a message popped onto my phone that made me sit bolt upright, stitches pulling against each heartbeat. Sender, Sophie Miller. I heard what happened. I need to talk to you. Privately. Urgent. I had never been close with Sophie. She was nearly 10 years younger, 2 years into Sterling and Rowe, working in internal audit. Quiet, punctual, polite, never gossiping. I stared at those words for a long time. The way she pressed privately and urgent chilled me. I hit call. She answered after one ring. Amelia, are you feeling better? Her voice trembled. I'm recovering. What's going on? A pause. You're firing. It wasn't just about your health. I can't explain over the phone. My internal email is being monitored. But if possible, can we meet tonight? After work, I hesitated. Where? Corner Brew Cafe, near 81st Street. Back corner table. I'll be there. She hung up before I could respond. That evening, I pulled on a knit cap, wrapped my scarf tight around my neck, and buttoned my coat over the healing scar. The cafe Sophie chose sat tucked beneath an old apartment building, its yellow light warm but discreet, quiet, hidden. She was already there, hands around a steaming mug of tea, eyes flicking constantly toward the door. When she saw me, she exhaled and gave a small nod. I sat down without speaking. She didn't either. It wasn't until the server brought over coffee that Sophie leaned toward me, her voice dropping as if afraid someone might be listening. Do you remember when the internal system started lagging at the beginning of the quarter? I nodded. There were a few times I had to send my reports twice because files froze. I had assumed it was just a temporary technical glitch. It wasn't the server, Sophie whispered. The system was being manipulated to redo the monthly reports. I frowned. You mean cooking the books? Not just cooking. Sophie met my eyes. Completely fabricating. They created phantom income streams from projects that hadn't even been signed and hid refunds and post-sale discounts. Do you know the Northbridge contract? Of course. I was the lead negotiator. They pulled out halfway, but on the quarterly report it still shows full revenue as if nothing ever happened. I went silent, my throat dry. Northbridge was one of the top 3 clients. If numbers were being twisted that badly, it meant the data was being engineered to hide something serious. Why would they do that? I asked. Just to hit quarterly targets? Sophie shook her head. No, it's to protect Ethan's equity. Richard is trying to push him into a permanent executive seat, but the condition is that Ethan must show 7% revenue growth for 2 consecutive quarters to gain shareholder approval. If he misses it, the plan collapses. The air around me felt heavy. So, Richard is manipulating the entire financial system just to secure Ethan a seat at the top? I whispered. Sophie nodded. And you were the obstacle. You knew too many real accounts, too many adjustments. You wouldn't sign off on doctored reports. You refused to close your eyes. I remembered the last quarterly meeting. Richard had hinted that I should loosen the numbers to meet deadlines. I had refused. Back then, I thought it was just another industry trick. Now I realized I wasn't just an obstacle. I was the only one who knew too much. And so he cut you out, I said slowly. Sophie didn't answer. She simply slid a small envelope across the table, her hand trembling. Inside are backup copies of emails, spreadsheets, and system logs. I saved them before my access was revoked. After today, I'll wipe every trace from my computer. I can't keep them anymore. I looked at her. You're risking a lot. I know. She gave a tight smile. But if Sterling collapses without the truth ever coming out, people like you will always be branded as weak, and they'll stay seated in power. I gripped the envelope, my chest heavy. It wasn't just betrayal. It was cold calculation, carefully plotted, and I was just a pawn pushed off the board. I left the cafe after the streetlights had flicked on, the envelope pressed tightly in my hand. Each step tugged painfully at my stitches, but inside my head, data points began to connect. Maybe my firing hadn't been negligence, it was a clearing of the path. And if that was true, then the end Richard was building toward would not just wound me, it would destroy the values I had once fought to preserve. That night, I sat in my small Upper West Side apartment, lamplight spilling through thin curtains, making Sophie's documents blur and sharpen like unhealed scars on paper. I read everything. Every spreadsheet, every altered email, every tampered log. There was no doubt left. Richard hadn't just removed me. He was reconstructing the firm's financial skeleton like a blind magician with blood on his hands. I didn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, the faces of clients surfaced. Harold Bennett, the man who once trusted me with his entire Wisconsin plant expansion. Elaine Vaughn, the CFO of a pharmaceutical company in Boston, who had called me in the middle of the night just to ask about one line in a contract appendix. Real people, real relationships. They couldn't be reduced to false numbers and doctored reports. The next morning, I buttoned a long coat to my throat and walked to Horizon's office, as Jonathan Pierce had arranged. The building stood at 221 Park Avenue, glass catching the pale March sky. Unlike the frenzied atmosphere of most financial firms, Horizon's lobby was calm. No one rushed. No phones blared. Everything ran with precision, without excess. A young woman at reception escorted me to the 17th floor, where Jonathan's office was. When the door opened, he was standing by the wide glass window, coffee in hand, eyes on the street below, as if mapping out an invisible plan. Amelia, he turned, setting his cup aside. I assume you've read everything Sophie gave you. I nodded. All of it. And I don't think Richard will stop there. He's burning shareholder money to protect his family's reputation. Correct? Jonathan motioned to the chair across from his desk. Sit. I have a serious proposal for you. I sat, fingers laced, waiting, though I already sensed where this was headed. I want you to join Horizon, he said firmly. Title: Vice President of Growth Strategy. But it's not just a title. I want you to hold equity. I leaned back slightly, not in surprise, but wary of his bluntness and speed. I just left a company where I was called dead weight, and now you want me in an executive seat? Jonathan smirked. Do you think I'd make a bet like this out of pity? I stayed silent. How many accounts did you hold at Sterling? Directly 9, indirectly more than 25. And how many would follow you if you left? I met his gaze. I don't have numbers, but I have memory, and I have their respect. Jonathan nodded. Then you already hold what Richard can't buy. I don't need another boardroom seat filler. I need someone who can actually expand territory. You're not afraid of Richard suing? I asked bluntly. My non-compete was tight. He tilted his head, as if waiting for that question. You were terminated without cause. That alone shatters the enforceability of any restrictive covenant. In theory, yes. I exhaled. But Richard won't sit quietly. He'll sue, even if he knows he can't win. Jonathan pressed a button. Moments later, a gray-haired woman entered, dark coat, leather briefcase in hand. Amelia, this is Linda Carter, Horizon's in-house counsel. She'll explain. Linda sat beside me, her voice calm. We've reviewed your personnel file, including your contract and Richard's termination text. Under New York labor law, when an employee is dismissed without clear cause, any post-employment restrictions aren't enforceable if they block someone's lawful livelihood. She placed a slim folder before me. This is a detailed analysis and counter-argument outline if Richard or Sterling and Rowe takes legal action. You have nothing to fear legally. We stand behind you. I looked down at the folder. My hands tightened. Since being fired, no one had said they were standing behind me. I lifted my eyes to Jonathan's. If I agree, I asked slowly. Where do you want me to start? Jonathan sat straighter, arms folded. With what you already have. Relationships, knowledge, leadership. And the mistakes Richard is desperate to bury, Linda added firmly. We don't need you to steal data. We don't need you to bring anything over. Just do what's right with your own credibility and memory. I didn't answer immediately, but inside my head, a line of names began forming. Not a revenge list. A list of people who deserve transparency, honesty, dedication, exactly the way I had once worked at Sterling. I turned to the window. The city beyond pulsed in its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet wounds in its glass towers. But I wasn't on the margins. I had a choice. And I wasn't choosing in the dark. That afternoon, I sat alone in a temporary office Horizon had given me on the 12th floor. Not luxurious, no leather chairs, no Manhattan skyline. Just a plain wooden desk, a water pitcher, and a brand new landline phone. Yet I felt calmer than in any office I'd ever stepped into at Sterling and Rowe. I opened my old notebook, leather cover frayed at the corners, and set it before me. Inside were names of people who had once called me in crisis, who had trusted me to untangle contracts like mazes, who had stayed on the line. When I was too exhausted but still typing emails at 3 a.m., I stopped at the first name, Harold Bennett, CEO of Bennett Manufacturing, a family-run heavy machinery company in Indiana, 3 generations old. A man who hated marketing fluff, ignored color-coded charts but valued honesty above all else. I picked up the phone, drew a deep breath, and dialed his direct line, his personal cell, which I had never used except when absolutely necessary. The line rang. 4 times. Bennett here. Hello, Harold. It's me, Amelia Hayes. He paused for 2 seconds. I heard papers shuffling on his end. Amelia? Good Lord. I thought you were on leave. Sterling's new kid told me you needed extended recovery time. I was about to send flowers but didn't have your address. No need, I said softly. The truth is, I'm no longer with Sterling. A complete pause. What did you say? I was fired. By text. While in a hospital bed. I didn't need to add more. He understood. His voice dropped. Let me guess, Richard. I stayed quiet. Silence was enough. He sighed. Anger unhidden. Shameful. You're the only one at Sterling who understood our systems, who cared about the people behind the contract, and they think replacing you with some intern is enough? I heard his chair scrape back, his shoes hitting the wooden floor. Where are you now? I just joined Horizon Capital. Jonathan Pierce? Yes. Harold gave a small laugh, not mocking. He always did know how to pick the right people. I tightened my grip on the phone. I didn't call to recruit, I just wanted you to know the truth before someone else spins another story. If you still need me, I'm here. You don't need to say more, Amelia. Send me Horizon's contact details. I'll request that our trial contract be shifted over. Sterling just sent me some meaningless addendum I hadn't signed yet. Now I never will. I nodded, even though he couldn't see. Thank you, Harold. I should thank you. As for Richard, I'll let him explain to the shareholders why he lost 12 years of trust over one foolish text. I set the phone down, my hands still trembling. After Harold, I called Elaine Vaughn in Boston, Troy Matthews in San Diego, and the CFO of Silver Ridge Chemicals, the one who once sent me a wedding invitation, even though I couldn't attend. Not a single one hung up coldly. None refused. On the contrary, each voice came back with shock, outrage, and then resolve. Send me an official email from Horizon. I'll have my legal team review the transfer clause, Elaine said. I suspected something when the internal bulletin came out and your name was missing. So that's what it was, Troy sighed. Don't worry, I'm not loyal to a logo. I'm loyal to the person. 3 different calls, 3 different voices, but one shared message. Trust doesn't live in the subject line of an email, it lives in who stands behind it. Later that day, Jonathan walked into my office. He didn't need to ask. He read my face and spoke right away. Looks like we just shook a corner of the market. I didn't hide my tired but relieved smile. I didn't expect them to respond this quickly. You're surprised because you've never seen your true value reflected so clearly. Jonathan sat beside me. Sterling thought they kept clients by holding the contracts. What they didn't understand was that some people don't sign with ink, they sign with trust. He leaned back, his voice lower. But Richard won't stay quiet. Word has reached him about the accounts shifting. I nodded. I don't expect him to be silent. I just hope I'm ready when the waves rise. Jonathan studied me for a long moment. You don't need to face this alone, Amelia. Horizon didn't bring you on to absorb the anger of the past. We invested in you for the future, I said. Nothing more. But for the first time in weeks, from the hospital bed, from the firing text, from Sophie's file, I felt like my hands weren't empty anymore. I had a list coming back to life. Not for revenge, but to prove when you are the last person keeping your word in a world slipping downhill, people will find their way back to you. Not for your title, but for the quality they can't replace. The next morning, as I stepped into the office, Linda Carter was already waiting by the glass wall, holding a stack of documents bordered in red. Her calm eyes carried a clear warning. We have a problem, she said as the door shut behind me. I sat down, nodding, waiting. Linda didn't circle around. She laid the stack on the desk and opened the first page. A financial news site posted an article less than an hour ago. They cited an internal source from Sterling and Rowe, accusing you of taking client data when you left. They used the phrase misappropriation of proprietary information. I froze. I never took a single file, not one note. I walked out with empty hands. I believe you, Linda said. Jonathan believes you, but the public may not. I picked up the documents, flipping through page after page. The article was crafted carefully, not directly accusing, but suggesting that client transitions to Horizon may have been the result of unauthorized access to old systems. It even included a quote from an anonymous employee at my former company. The line, small but sharp. Amelia often kept backup files outside regular hours, bypassing the security system. I gave a bitter laugh. Anonymous. Richard's fingerprints are all over this. Linda didn't deny it. We've identified the PR firm behind the piece, Alden and Brooks, a company that specializes in image crisis management. And the contract came from Sterling and Rowe. I leaned back in my chair. What I felt wasn't rage. It was sorrow. I once thought that even if Richard was cold, he would hold on to a shred of dignity. I overestimated him. He didn't just want me unemployed. He wanted me discredited, stripped of the trust I had built over years. Linda continued. They're trying to get ahead of Horizon's contracts. They want clients unsettled, the press doubtful. And if we react too aggressively, they'll spin it as panic. I clenched my hands lightly. So, what do we do? She opened her bag and pulled out a small black USB drive. Sophie Miller sent this morning. A captured chain of internal emails from last month. It includes Richard directly instructing the tech department to fabricate data for a board presentation. I stiffened. In writing, crystal clear, signed, time-stamped with responses from the system staff. Linda opened her laptop and plugged the USB in. The screen showed an email titled Northbridge Forecast Adjustment Urgent. Inside, Richard wrote, create a revenue forecast showing 18% growth as discussed. No need to keep the original. We need numbers that fit before Thursday's meeting. Send me the adjusted PDF. Below was the technician's reply. Understood, but to confirm, this report won't match actual transaction data. And at the bottom, Richard had handwritten on a scanned PDF, we present the future, not the past. I closed my eyes. A chill ran down my spine. Linda spoke softly, her voice edged with disgust at how the game was played. We won't counter with another article. We'll send a formal legal demand to Alden and Brooks, requiring retraction and public apology. At the same time, we'll file this with the SEC to document deliberate financial manipulation. I opened my eyes, looking at her. He thinks I'll collapse under slander. Linda gave a slight nod. And we know you'll stand taller when the truth speaks. That afternoon, Horizon issued a short statement across its seas. Official media channels. We confirm no data violations occurred regarding our new personnel. All client transitions are transparent, compliant with current regulations, and based on client choice. No mention of my name. No mention of Richard. Just simple, clear, steady, as a pillar in the wind. I stepped outside, early spring air brushing my loose hair. Amid the city's endless movement, I stood still for a moment beneath a large Horizon billboard on Lexington Avenue. My name not there, but the values I carried already echoing outward. And I thought of Richard. Not with hatred, but regret. He once held a loyal team, a foundation of trust. But he chose manipulation over leadership, coercion over building, and now he would face the weight of his own choices. One Monday morning, as I poured my first cup of coffee in the office, Linda Carter appeared at the door holding a thick file, her eyes grave. Sterling and Rowe just filed a formal lawsuit, she said, her voice steady, every word like a gavel striking stone. I set my cup down, my chest sinking, not surprised, but chilled all the same. On what grounds? I asked. Linda stepped in, laying the file on my desk, opening it. Misappropriation and unauthorized use of internal information, leveraging prior position to solicit clients, violation of non-compete agreement. She read each charge slowly. I gave a dry laugh. They're throwing mud at the wall, hoping something sticks. Exactly, Linda nodded. And we'll show them our wall is stone. Horizon didn't delay. Within 48 hours, the legal team filed an official response with the Manhattan District Court and also sent notices to every client transitioning from Sterling. The notice wasn't heavy with legal jargon. It simply stated, Horizon respects client choice and affirms no use of improper data in any transition. When the hearing came, I walked into the courtroom with Linda and two paralegals, my hair tied neatly back, wearing a plain gray suit, no jewelry. I wasn't there to flaunt power. I was there to hold the truth. Across the aisle, Richard Monroe sat beside his attorney, a silver-haired man named Carl Burson, face tense, eyes glued to his papers. The judge was Judith Harper, known for bluntness and no tolerance for cases rooted in personal vendettas. I had heard of her, but when she lifted her gaze and fixed it on Richard, I understood why the entire financial sector tread carefully in her courtroom. Mr. Monroe, she began, you are suing an employee you terminated by text without stating cause for using data that, according to records, she had no access to after termination. Do you have evidence that any data was taken illegally? Carl stood, adjusting his glasses. We have reason to suspect that relationships were leveraged to influence client decisions. Suspicion is not evidence, Judge Harper cut in. Again, do you have evidence that Miss Hayes or Horizon used Sterling and Rowe data unlawfully? A silence stretched. Carl flipped through pages, then stayed quiet. Linda rose. Your Honor, may I submit the termination text sent by Mr. Monroe to Miss Hayes on March 4th at 9:22 a.m. The text not only confirmed termination, but revoked her access immediately. Judge Harper scanned the printed message. You have no value here. Access revoked. Do not return. She read aloud, then set it down. It appears the plaintiff voided all contractual obligations himself, including the non-compete. Linda gave a calm nod. We also submit system logs verifying that from the moment of termination onward, Miss Hayes's account never accessed Sterling and Rowe databases. Across the courtroom, Richard sat rigid, hands clenched until his knuckles whitened. He didn't speak, he didn't look at me. By the end of the hearing, Judge Harper struck her gavel. The claims of data misappropriation are dismissed. The non-compete is void following a termination without cause. The court will consider any countersuit for reputational damages should the defendant choose. The atmosphere shifted. I didn't glance at Richard. I stood with Linda, gathered our documents, and left the courtroom. That afternoon, the court released the hearing transcript. Financial media picked it up immediately. But the headlines this time were different. Court clears Amelia Hayes, Sterling and Rowe faces potential countersuit. Judge dismisses data claims Sterling's case may backfire. From hospital bed to courtroom, betrayed executive shakes the finance world. Within 24 hours, I had dozens of messages from former colleagues, old classmates, even mentors from my earliest career days. I watched the hearing. You were fearless. Sterling just shot itself in the foot. You're the reason I believe again in something called professional ethics. I didn't respond to all of them, but each line, each word, touched the deepest part of me. The place cracked open by being dismissed, humiliated, abandoned at my weakest. Now, I don't need to shout to reclaim my name. I just need to stand firm and let the truth speak for itself. I was scanning my weekend schedule when an email from an unfamiliar address appeared. The subject line only 2 words. You need to see. Sender Dana Wells. Her name froze me. Dana was one of the long-serving mid-level managers at Sterling and Rowe, in charge of internal budget control for major projects, a role close enough to see where the money flowed, yet far enough to be excluded from the final decision rooms. I opened the email. Just one short line. This is the part they thought no one kept. But I did, and now I can't stay silent. Attached was an encrypted PDF. I sent it to Linda immediately. Barely 15 minutes later, she called back, her voice low and steady. We just received the second bomb. That afternoon, I left my office and met Linda on the 18th floor, where the legal team was managing the media crisis. On the table lay a thick, 200-page printout, fake invoices, internal budget approvals without any records, and most striking of all, a chain of internal emails between Richard and Ethan Monroe. I flipped to the first page. Advertising costs for the New Point project have a shortfall of $320,000. Ethan, create an advance invoice for media to cover the Q1 budget. No receipt needed. Note, logistics expense. Below was Ethan's reply. Don't worry, I'll do it just like last month. I'll list the third party as a new company. I'll use the old EIN so it won't flag the system. I barely dared to breathe. The next line chilled my whole body. We need to keep profit growth reports stable through next quarter to protect equity with the key group. Clean the books before the shareholder meeting. Linda turned the pages. There are a total of 12 falsified transactions in the last 8 months. The adjusted amount is over $2.3 million. I froze. This wasn't massaging numbers to make results look good. This was systemic, deliberate, and bore the clear marks of corruption. Jonathan walked in shortly after. He didn't need Linda to explain. One glance at the list was enough for him to understand the severity. The question now, he said, is which board members knew and stayed quiet. I looked at him. And if some didn't know? Jonathan sat down, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the stack of documents like chess pieces he was arranging in his mind. Then we put this in front of them. Linda nodded. A consolidated report is being drafted. We'll deliver it individually to each board member. No legal system, no press release. Just a warning that they're holding a sinking ship, and they need to decide whether to go down with it. I turned to her. And if they ignore it? Jonathan answered. The SEC won't ignore it, neither will the media, but at least we give them the chance to choose right. We agreed to send the report Monday morning. Hard copies. Hand-delivered to the 8 board members who together held more than 60% of Sterling and Rowe's voting power. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. I cannot speak publicly. But your report reached me, and I'm reading every line. A, B, I went still. A, B, were the initials of Arthur Bellman, founder of Bellman Capital, holding 17% of Sterling and Rowe's shares, and one of the 3 independent board members. He was known as tough, quiet, and unshakable by either media or internal pressure. I replied with one line, "Thank you for reading." The next day, Jonathan entered my office with a completely different look. Not encouragement. Preparation for a decisive battle. "We just received a call from Bellman Capital," he said. "Arthur wants to meet you, privately." I froze. Just me? He wants to hear from the person who witnessed Richard's cover-ups. No intermediaries, no lawyers. I nodded, my hand tightening around my bag strap. Jonathan held my gaze for a long moment before speaking, slow and firm. "This isn't about defending honor anymore. This is the chance to end an era for everyone still inside that company." I didn't answer, but I understood, and this time I would walk into that room not asking to be heard, but demanding that they listen. The meeting with Arthur Bellman was set in a private conference room on the 42nd floor of Bellman Capital Quiet Space, walnut wood interior, no logos, no LED screens, only a long table and 2 glasses of water. Arthur walked in right on time, no assistant, no entourage. A man in his 60s, compact frame, but every step carried the weight of someone who had shaped dozens of top investment funds in New York. He didn't shake hands immediately. He just sat down, studied me for a few seconds as if I were a living report. "Miss Hayes," he said, voice gravelly, "I've read the file." I nodded slightly. There are 2 kinds of people who bring a company down, the manipulators, and the ones who see it and do nothing. I held his gaze. And I don't want to be the second kind. Arthur didn't respond right away. He opened the file, turned to the page with Dana's scanned fake invoice. "How long have you held all this?" "Not long. Some came from Sophie, the rest from Dana. They worked under Richard." He gave a brief nod. "I'm not surprised at Richard, but Ethan was a mistake of the entire board." "Not just a mistake," I said clearly, "an accomplice." Arthur looked straight into my eyes. The silence between us wasn't confrontation anymore. It was acknowledgement. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "It's not what I want," I replied. "It's what your company needs to do to save what's left. Clients are leaving, the stock is already wavering. Every week without action is another week. Sterling and Rowe loses more trust." He leaned back, fingers laced together. "We'll call an emergency board meeting Tuesday. But to convince the rest, I need you there." I didn't hesitate. "I'll come, not to make enemies, but to speak the truth they've avoided too long." Arthur stood, extended his hand. "Then you'll be the first to leave Sterling the right way." 3 days later, the board meeting was convened. No public notice, no press. But I knew from that moment, things would no longer be in Richard's hands. The conference room at Sterling and Rowe's headquarters glared with overhead lights, curtains drawn. 10 chairs circled a large oval table. Arthur sat in the center, holding the internal report. I walked in with Linda. The room stiffened. Richard sat at the head. Ethan was absent. Arthur began without preamble. "We are losing clients at an unprecedented rate. We gave Richard free rein for too long, but these new documents show that trust was betrayed." A woman on the board, Caroline Shore, interjected. "I need to verify the authenticity of this file before voting on anything." Linda presented original emails with digital IDs, system logs with timestamps, even Ethan's reply to the accounting team. Richard spoke, voice strained. "This is a misunderstanding. The adjustments were temporary. We intended to update them next quarter." I looked at him, but next quarter never came. "And you used those fabricated numbers to persuade shareholders to increase Ethan's equity. That's deception, not just in practice, but in ethics." Richard turned to the board, his voice rising. "She's trying to push me out to serve Horizon. This is corporate warfare. She has a personal agenda." Arthur tapped his hand lightly on the table. "We're not here today to talk about Horizon. We're here to deal with an executive who made a series of false decisions, manipulated financial data, and put an unqualified person in a role affecting hundreds of millions of dollars." No one objected. One of the senior members, Dwight Harner, adjusted his glasses, looked at Richard, and said softly, almost like a breath, "You haven't just lost control. You've lost credibility." The vote took place that very afternoon. Richard Monroe was removed from his executive position, suspended from all system access, and ordered to cooperate with the internal investigation. At the same time, Ethan Monroe was summoned for a hearing but never showed up. 3 days later, the company received his resignation by email, with no return address. Rumors spread that Ethan had left New York immediately after receiving the summons. Over the next 6 weeks, Sterling and Rowe's stock lost more than 54% of its market value. 3 major contracts were canceled outright. The board restructured, firing 3 department heads who had signed off on Ethan's reports. And in that landscape, Horizon became the destination for clients seeking not only strong management but also integrity. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't gloat. I simply sat quietly on a weekend night, watching Manhattan's lights reflected in the glass, thinking of what I had walked through. Not everyone gets the chance to see the person who once pushed them into the abyss, dragged into the light. But when it happens, you understand, justice doesn't always arrive on time, but it does arrive if you stay steadfast enough not to walk away in silence. I stepped into Horizon's main boardroom on a crisp October morning. Early sunlight streamed through glass walls, casting a serene glow across the ash-colored carpet. Brown leather chairs were neatly arranged around the long rectangular table, where executives sat in quiet conversation before the meeting began. Jonathan stood near the window, sleeves unbuttoned, a steaming espresso in hand. When he saw me, he nodded slightly. His eyes held not the look of a superior to a subordinate, but of respect between two people who had fought a battle without armor. "Amelia," he said as I joined him, "it's a privilege to work with someone who not only keeps her word, but also makes the promises of this entire company mean something." I smiled. "I only tried to do my part." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done more than that." And today, the board voted unanimously. Starting next quarter, you will officially serve as Chief Strategy Officer. Titles matter less than this. From now on, all client development, domestic and international, is yours. Full authority. I looked at him, unable to hide my emotion. Not because of the title, not because of the promotion, but because I felt trust, the very thing I once thought I would never receive again after all that I had lost. Jonathan wasn't finished. "And there's one more thing." He pulled a small envelope with silver trim from his jacket pocket, no sender's name. "I submitted a proposal to the board and they agreed. Beginning next quarter, you'll join as a non-executive board member. We need the voice of someone who understands clients, who values people, not just spreadsheets." I took the envelope, my hand trembling. "Are you sure?" I asked softly. "You're the one who turned the tide. No one else fits better." His voice was resolute. That afternoon, Horizon hosted an internal gathering to announce third quarter financial results. The 16th floor hall glowed under golden lights, glasses raised in celebration of unprecedented growth, revenue up 42% year over year, nearly one-third of it from contracts gained after Sterling and Rowe's collapse. I was invited to speak, and there I stood amid laughter and toasts, not as a victor, but as a survivor. I looked around. Faces I had seen when I first came to Horizon, when I still limped from an unhealed incision, when my name was tied to a cruel rumor. Now they looked at me differently, not with pity, but with trust. I held the microphone, my voice steady and clear. "Someone once told me loyalty is the foundation of business." I believed that until I understood loyalty is only power when it's reciprocated. Otherwise, it's just chains. The room fell silent for a few seconds, then erupted in applause. I didn't cry, but my heart felt light, as though someone had lifted a weight that had hung inside my chest too long. That night, I returned to my office, its wide glass windows opening to New York, glittering with lights. The city below buzzed as always, but inside me, everything slowed. I stood at the window, arms crossed, gazing at the golden streaks stretching across Madison Avenue. Those beams of light, weaving into endless roads, reminded me that no matter the upheaval, this city never waits. It only listens to those with the will to walk through the storm, without letting the fall break their back. I was no longer the woman who once knelt beside a hospital bed in shame. I was no longer the woman who left Sterling empty-handed, carrying a scar and a nameless wound. I stood here not for those who turned away, but for those who had the courage to stand beside me when everything collapsed. And in that rare moment of peace in a city that never sleeps, I smiled. Not because I had won, but because I no longer needed to bow my head. I stood there still, eyes tracing the flickering windows of towering buildings, each one a story untold, a secret unspoken, a person learning how to rise again after loss. Perhaps you are listening to this story from far away. Perhaps you've never stepped into a boardroom thick with power plays, but I believe each of us has, at least once, placed trust in the wrong hands. Hoped someone would defend us only to receive silence, or worse, betrayal. What do you think of my story? Of the way I chose to rise not by shouting but by proving myself through action and consistency? Have you ever been underestimated in a place you gave your all? And if so, what did you do to reclaim your worth? Share your thoughts with me in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear what you think. Because this story isn't only mine. It belongs to all of us, those once seen as easy to discard, yet who ultimately became the ones rewriting the ending. And if you'd like to hear more journeys like this of mothers abandoned by their children, daughters enduring favoritism at home, or men rebuilding from ruin, subscribe to this channel. Because some stories, when you hear them, don't just let you understand others, they help you understand yourself. And maybe you are already beginning to write your own.